Talking about the roots of violence is very daunting. It's daunting because there is a lot of conflicting views about violence and its origins. It may not be I realize that from my origins that it's no surprise I'm interested in the subject, being the granddaughter of a refugee from the Spanish Civil War, and then my family, my father, having to escape from Colombia in the violence. So here I am. And I was brought up as a psychotherapist, being trained that we're all born innately violent. Therefore, we can't do anything about it. That didn't make sense to me, because when I was working with violent men and women, what I found out was that they, practically all of them, had lived an early life and childhood of violent abuse and neglect. And also what was very interesting was that they recreated this same patterns of violence as adults. The women tended to be the victims, and then they became victims. Men tended to identify with their abusers, and then repeated the patterns of abuse. So I thought, I really must look into this. And what I found was that when we're born, our brain is only partly programmed in relation to how we see ourselves and how we relate to others. Part of the programming, of course, is our genes, and part is what's happened in the womb. But the greatest part actually is what happens in those first 2 years of life. In those first 2 years of life, if all goes well, and I'm a baby who's made to feel special and lovable, and who's encouraged, and the people respond to me, and they make me feel that I'm valued, then that is how I begin to feel myself to be. If, on the other hand, I'm rejected, I'm told I'm nasty, horrible, vile, stupid, an idiot, that is how I end up feeling myself to be. It's strange. It's as if we form hologram selves in our minds, created by all these interacting experiences we get from others, so that we become, in a sense, what others saw us to be. And then, of course, when we grow up, we have other experiences. Sometimes those other experiences are very positive. We've had a very unfortunate background, because one loving person, a teacher, a grandmother, somebody who seems to understand what I'm going through can make things better. But it is a very heavy load that we carry when our life has been negative in early life. Indeed, let's imagine that somebody who's feeling a positive hologram self, who feels confident, faces rejection. Well, you can get very upset, angry even, but you don't again become a bully or a victim. You tend to avoid that. However, somebody who's in fact been made to feel very inadequate and hopeless is constantly facing the potential to be humiliated or rejected. And if that has really been terrible, that person not only fears the humiliation, but actually fears annihilation, like he's no longer, who is he? So I'm going to bring you to imagine this hologram self of a vulnerable person. And this individual is facing someone who is disrespecting him, even if it's just a look. And suddenly, this man from a background of violence is in terrifying position, because he is no longer the man that you see. He's that little boy inside that was terrified by his father, who could actually annihilate him physically or emotionally. So the man who has brought this about is no longer experienced as another human being. He has become the tormentor of his childhood, who nearly annihilated him. Out comes the weapon. Gone is that face he is no longer. Indeed. As one prisoner said in an American jail, it's better to be bad than not to be at all. And so it is. And so what do we say when we see a man killing another or a young boy killing another for no apparent reason? We say, he's evil. The papers say, don't they? The media. What use is that? And what does the state do? I'm afraid it locks them up usually and punishes them. Rehabilitation in prison is going down with all the other good things. And so these people are simply reinforced in their cycle of violence and their negative hologram selves. So I'm going to take you to imagine somebody who's actually had this experience. He is a real person called Lenny. And Lenny was a petty thief who ended up in a state high security prison. He was very lucky, though, because he had a nice psychiatrist who understood violent men. And he is called, he's alive, and he's called Dr. Johnson. And he gave a history of child abuse, being battered by his mother as a kid. And one day this doctor said to him, Lenny, just imagine your mother sitting there in front of you. What would you say to her? Lenny tries to look brave and she says, Mother, you can't hit me anymore. I'm an adult. But as he says it, he starts crumbling in his chair and he goes all pale and his hand goes in front of his mouth. What's the matter, says the doctor. Fear, doctor. And he admits he could never say this to his imagined mother, who is in his head, clearly. And the doctor says, why not? Because she might get up and clout me. This is true. And the doctor says, and as he's saying it, though, he's realizing that this woman is now 85 years old, very small and frail, and he's a huge, big 6-foot man. But he says, she's still got a lot of life. She's lively, you know. He does. Poor man, we can see that in his mind there still is this hologram self of me, terrified little boy, in the face of his mother, who could put him down and make him feel so awful. So what did he do? What was his crime? He was out stealing on the downs, Sussex Downs. It was a horrible wet night with his mate. And his mate said to him, let's go and stay at your mother's house, so we'll be nice and warm. Lenny said, no. And the mate started to mock him. At that point, Lenny got hold of a bar and just bashed him to death. See, underneath this big, tough chap, there was this little boy who was humiliated by his mother and made to feel a wimp, not man enough. And back in that humiliating situation on the receiving end of his mate, he had to get rid of the shame. And he did. Shame is one of the biggest causes of violence. So, you see, violence is transmitted. What we know is that there are many, many Lennys in this world, unfortunately. Perhaps not as bad, but pretty bad. Men who feel very vulnerable in relation to their partner's capacity to humiliate them or reject them, and who then enact what Lenny did. They get rid of that humiliation. In England and Wales alone, we lose 2 women a week through being killed by partners or ex-partners. And around the world this happens. And in England and Wales, we lose 2 children a week because of child abuse in family homes with domestic violence. And that doesn't mention all the others who have been sexually abused or emotionally neglected, which now appears to be the biggest cause of damage. So it's very sad, but it does seem that violence actually does begin at home. But in a way that's good, because perhaps we can do more about it, as you're going to find out. It begins at home, but it's transmitted down the generations from parent to child. And we now have additional information that a mother who has, for instance, got post-traumatic stress disorder from either being beaten up as a child or in the current domestic violence situation, this woman transmits in some way some information to the genes of her child in the womb that actually make this child in adulthood more likely to develop trauma symptoms and hence violence. And of course, we're just talking here about trauma, but in fact, do remember that mothers who are depressed, also are unable to respond to their children in the way. And mothers who are in having serious loss through grief. And the very important thing to remember, and the programming also involves emotions, that when those first few years of life, those first months, is when a baby's brain is being given the chance to regulate emotions. Because a baby, as you know, when he's first born, cries and cries with distress until he's blue in the face. And it's only the kind, sensitive response of parents or substitute parents that actually enable this child to regulate emotions. So if the mother is traumatized, she can't do it, and she can't do it for her child. So as I said, there is some good news. The good news is that we also carry within us the tools to actually put aside that violent tendency and actually create a more loving world. How? Well, look with me. You all know, don't you, that if we are frightened, what can we do? We can fight or we can fly. That is called the fight-flight response. And that is the time when people commit violence. That is the state we are in. And then we have another one, which is much more relevant to little children. Because if you're a tiny little kid and there's a big adult after you, you can't fight. And you don't flee because you depend on that adult for life. So you freeze, like the Bambis. And you may go and run away in your mind. These two states, the yellow and the red, are controlled by a very powerful nerve called the reptilian vagus nerve that works throughout the body, and it's a defense system. But fortunately, we are not reptilians anymore. We're also mammals. And as mammals, we bring up our children. We bring them up, we care for them. And that requires us to have a mammalian vagus, a new vagus, which actually enables us to attune to our baby, to provide the love through eye contact, warm facial expressions, understanding facial expressions, and a soothing, modulated voice. All these traits are what I call being in the green zone, which we will reach. There we are. And it's that zone that is so wonderful, because in that zone, you are able to be sensitive to your babes, sensitive to your partners, and the wonderful thing is that this zone keeps in check the yellow and red, and you can't commit acts of violence in the green zone. So we do have the potential. And what the Chinese understood, or other Orientals, is that you can actually switch it on. But not only that, we're also, by the way, and this is important, we also have our brain functioning at its best in the green zone. So we can think clearly. In fact, that's why managers are trying to get their staff to become green zone oriented. And they are using the techniques from Chinese and other Oriental people, using the breathing techniques that are involved with yoga, meditation, mindfulness, which if you practice them enough and you learn to do them, you can actually move out of those yellow-red zones and into that green zone. And this is all of you, all of us, can go on the internet and actually find out a lot of these things. And they're actually good courses as well for those who can't leave home and so on. And that is one of the ways that we can begin to change this cycle. And they are using these techniques now in the psychiatric world with people who are violent, and in the prison systems, people like Lenny. And they are now developing new therapies which are actually based on this attunement, getting people, and one of them is a very special one. If people are in trouble and it's not enough to do these exercises, then do look for help. And one area of help is the video interaction guidance work, for instance, that actually enables parents whose the aim of every parent is to provide the best possible for their child. They don't want to be bad. And they work on the video of the good moments, and through the video they manage to help parents to actually achieve the green zone with their little ones. And they get healing. Traumatized parents seem to be getting healed by the love of their children through this therapy. If you go NSPCC, they have it, and so on. It's being spread all over England and Europe and South America. So I wanted to leave you with the fact that it is very important, those first 2 years, but if you can turn into the green zone and you can put those hologram ghosts to rest and make some happiness and break the cycle of violence in your family lives. Thank you.